Welcome to Human Rights Asia Weekly Roundup. In this week's program, Thai military continue roundup of coup critics. Another brutal gang rape and murder of teen cousins in India. Protest held against shocking honor killing in front of court in Lahore in Pakistan. Torture and assassination victim Gerard Perera's perpetrators lose appeal in Sri Lanka. Voices of survivors this week also from Sri Lanka. Welcome to Human Rights Asia Weekly Roundup. I am Anjuman Ara Begum. We start with an update on the tense situation in Thailand, where the military declared a coup on April 22nd. In the weeks since the coup, the military has summoned large numbers of critics. For more on what's happening in Thailand, we spoke with Tyrell Haberkorn, senior lecturer at the Australian National University's Department of Political and Social Change.
This coup is a bit different from earlier coups because martial law was declared 2 days prior to the coup on May 20th. Usually martial law is declared after a coup. What it meant in this case is that the 2 days prior to the coup, there was already a pretty strong clampdown on media freedom. And so 2 days later, when the coup happened on May 22nd, on the afternoon of May 22nd, there was already less space for freedom of expression and certainly less space for any kind of critical response to the coup. It seems like maybe that's the National Council for Peace and Order. They're definitely interested in the order side of things. I'm not sure that their actions could be interpreted as peaceful in any context. On the very first day of the coup, they began summoning people to report to the military. To date, they've summoned 349 people officially, and many others unofficially. Initially, they were targeting people who were official members of political parties on all sides of the political spectrum. And so first, it was those members of those groups of people. But then beginning with lists announced on Saturday, the 24th, they began calling progressive academics, publishers, human rights defenders, artists, writers, which is a much different category of people. And this is the first time since the late 1970s, since 1976, that these categories of people have been targeted. It's been quite unclear exactly what will happen to the people who report themselves, and people's experiences have been different. So some people have been gone and released the same day, and then other people have reported themselves and then been detained for 7 days, frequently in undisclosed locations. The junta has been very clear that absolutely no criticism or questioning of the role of the monarchy will be tolerated, but they're also incredibly concerned about opposition to the coup itself. Under martial law, any gathering, any political gathering of 5 or more people is illegal and is punishable with a sentence of up to 2 years and up to 40,000 baht or both. And yet, despite this, from the very beginning, citizens have continued to go out into the streets and peacefully protest, even though there are literally thousands of armed soldiers in the streets in Bangkok. And the video footage of the response to the protests is striking because at the beginning, people were holding just A4 pieces of paper with messages calling for freedom and for a return to democracy and against the coup. And when soldiers have gone after protesters, they've sort of made a beeline for people holding these A4 sheets of paper. And so people have then instead now switched to, in the past couple of days, to 2 other strategies of getting into groups of less than 5 and just standing or sitting down in public and reading books like 1984. Or the other thing that people have been doing is meeting in public and just holding up 3 fingers, because holding an A4 sign seems to now be too dangerous because it will arouse the ire of the soldiers. So I think the junta is in deep panic about any kind of criticism. It's remarkable that people are continuing to protest, even though with every time there's been a protest in public, there have been at least several arrests. About the detentions is that when people are released, they're forced to sign a statement that, number one, affirms that they were not beaten, coerced, tortured, or lied to while they were in detention, and that all of the personal belongings that they brought with them have been returned to them. But they're also required to make a statement that they will not engage in any political activities or attend any political meetings, and that they will not leave the country without permission of the head of the junta. They're not being released unconditionally. Fairly severe conditions are being placed on them, and they're being informed that they will be watched and they will be monitored.
The outrage over the latest honor killing in Lahore, Pakistan continues. Farjana Iqbal, who was stoned to death by her father and other male relatives outside the Lahore High Court on May 27th, after she married a man of her choice. She had arrived at the courthouse to record a statement in favor of her husband, accused of kidnapping her and forcing her into marriage by her own family. Farjana's father was detained at the crime scene, and 4 additional men, including Farjana's uncle, 2 cousins, and a driver, were arrested on May 30th, according to a senior police officer. In a bizarre twist, it turns out that the husband of the women, while calling for justice for his murdered wife, himself murdered his first wife in order to marry the current victim. More than thousands honor killings are committed every year in Pakistan, and many more are thought to go unreported. But this case has received widespread media coverage both in Pakistan and internationally, as it took place in a public place outside a courthouse, witnessed by the public and even police officers who allegedly did not make any attempt to help the women. Despite the massive protests that shook India after the brutal gang rape and murder of a young woman in Delhi in December 2012, sexual violence continues unabated in India. Women from Dalit and other oppressed communities often bear the brunt of such violence. AHRC has previously reported on the continuing struggle of 4 Dalit sisters from Bhagana in Haryana, who still wait for justice in Delhi after being gang raped by dominant caste members of their own village. This week, yet another shocking report of gang rape and murder of 2 teenage girls have come to light. The girls, who were 14 and 16 years old cousins, had been left hanging by their necks from a tree. The girls, who had gone outside to a field under the cover of darkness, as they, like so many others in India, lack access to toilets. This lack makes young women vulnerable to predatory men. Apathy for victims of such crimes runs deep in the system. Meanwhile, scorching heat notwithstanding, the Bhagana victims continue to protest with their family in the national capital. The AHRC had just received a report that Delhi police, that reports directly to the Union Home Ministry, has dismantled the temporary tents that Bhagana protesters had put up in an early morning crackdown at 5 a.m. The protesters, however, have refused to leave the venue and are continuing their protest. The AHRC urges the new government to urgently take serious measures to combat rampant sexual violence in India. On June 1st, the Supreme Court dismissed an appeal made by several police officers against a judgment of the Court of Appeal, which quashed the High Court judgment acquitting the accused and ordering a retrial. The case referred to the case of torture against Sri Lankan cook Gerard Perera, who was later murdered to silence him from testifying against the perpetrators. The police officers appealed to the Supreme Court, stating that the Court of Appeal judgment was erroneous. However, The Supreme Court rejected the appeal and restated that the retrial should be held in terms of the judgment of the Court of Appeal. The Supreme Court further made an order that the Assistant Superintendent of Police who was in charge of this police team should also be indicted together with these police officers. The original charges were framed under the Convention Against Torture Act number 22 of 1994, where these police officers were charged with committing an offense of torture of Gerard Perera. Mr. Perera suffers serious injuries and as a result suffered renal failure and spent almost 3 weeks in a coma. The police officers took up the defense that while admitting that Mr. Perera had been tortured in police custody, the prosecution has failed to establish the identities of the police officers who caused the injuries to him. The Court of Appeal held that once the fact of torture is established in police custody, the burden has shifted to the accused to prove that they were not the ones who caused the injury. The offense of torture, if proved, carries a 7-year mandatory sentence and 10,000 rupee fine. In this week's Voices of Survivors, we hear from laborer Aranga Chamila from Sri Lanka, who was tortured by Nagoda police in Galle. On November 20th last year, he went to the police station at about 7 p.m. after receiving a message from Nagoda police. He was put into a cell immediately without any reason after being questioned about a house fire.
ඊට පස්සේ මම කූඩුවෙන් එළියට පුස්මුමාර මහත්මයා ගත්තා. අරගෙන එළියට අරගෙන හැන්කප් දෙයක් දාලි වෙලා අට කාමරේට අරන් ගිහිල්ලි වෙලා මම දන ගැස්සලි වෙලා මට අතින් පයින් ගැව්වා. කියපන් ඇත්තම බනේද ගෙට ගිනි තිබ්බ කියලා ගැව්වා. මං කිව්වා සර් අඬ මං කිව්වා සර් මම දන්නේ නැහැ මං ඒ සම්බන්ධයක් දන්නේ නැහැ කියලා මං කිව්වා. සාර ආලාම්ල දෙන්නෙක් එක්ක ඇවිල්ලා මගේ ඇඳුම් බලෙන් ගැලෙව්වා ඔක්කොම. ගලවලි වෙලා ඊට පස්සුව සෙදි පටියක් ගෙනල්ලා මගේ අත් දෙක ගැට ගාලා දන ඉස ළඟට පාත් කළා පොල්ලක් ගෙනල්ලා කකුල් දෙකට අත් දෙකට අතරෙන් දාලා දමලි වෙලා මම මේස දෙකක් උස ගෙනල්ලා ඒ දෙක දුරස් කොල්ල තියලා ඒක අතරේ මම දෙන්නෙක් ප්‍රාලාම්ල දෙන්නත් එක්ක උස්සලා තිව්වා. උස්සලා මම ඒ පොල්ලේ එල්ලලා තිව්වා. එල්ලලා ඊට පස්සුව කළු පාට කේබල්ලයක් වගේ ගෙනල්ලා මට පුස්මුමාර මහත්තයා ගැව්වා. ගාලා කියපන් ඇත්ත කියපන් කියලා උඹ නේද ගෙට ගිනි තිව්වේ කියලා කියපන් කිය ගැව්වා. ඉතින් කලින් දවසේ වගේ අත් දෙක ගැට ගාලා දනපොකට දෙනකට තියලි වෙලා පොල්ලක් දාලි වෙලා ඒකට ආයි අර විදිහට උඩ එල්ලුවා. ඊට පස්සෙ ඒ පින්ගාර පා එකට බස්සලා ඒකට පෙට්‍රල් කාල් භාගයක් වගේ පමණ දමලා මගේ ඔළුවේ ඉඳලා බස්සලා තුන් පස් පාරක් එකපාරක් ඇල්ලුවා. මං ඒ බුදු සර් කියලා මම මාව මැරේ කියලා කියනකොට ආයෙ එළියට ගත්තා. එහෙම පස්වෙනි පාරක් දැම්ම. පස්වෙනි පාරදී මම මොන වුණාද කියලා දන්නේ නැහැ.
This is all for this week's Human Rights Asia Weekly Roundup. For more information, log on to www.humanrights.asia. Thank you for watching and see you next week.